Bonjour et
Hello, and thank you for joining us to this session entitled Should Central Bank's Mandate be Revised? First of all, I'm going to introduce the speakers before we have a short introduction. So we have the Governor MAKHLOUF from the Central Bank of Ireland, then we have Governor STOURNARAS from the Bank of Greece, and Mrs. DANZANBALJIR, who's a member of the Supervisory Board of the Bank of Mongolia. First, we'll have an introduction on this discussion by Professor POLLIN, who will start the conversation, who will kick off the discussion once he's had his glass of water. Thank you. Thank you, Charlotte. We've known for some time that central banks have to pursue a main goal, price stability, and also stability of the financial system, including the banking system, two objectives that are independent to one another. But the central banks need to fulfill those duties. Generally, things are broader than that, because Fed Reserve has a dual mandate. That means that it needs to work to make sure that they have a maximum of employment. And if you look at the statutes of the ECB, they say that it contributes to the objectives of economic policy of the community, which is very wide. So a network of regulators was built accordingly. There are 445 regulators and also central banks to do what we call a greening of the financial system. This is justified, and this is actually this is an objective of the central banks for the stability of the financial system, because they don't want to avoid to grant loans to operations and investments that would be contrary to the greening of the economy, and so that would present risks from this point of view, no problem. But then if we go further, for instance, if we offer a policy of selective credit that would allow to grant loans in the better conditions to green investments rather than brown investments, as we say, then it's another kettle of fish. We would have choices to make, and there would be legitimacy, more reduced legitimacy from central banks. And this raises some issues, including for their independence, because today most central banks, a large part of central banks in advanced countries and even in emerging countries, have their own independence. And theoretically and in practice, we've shown that, and we've demonstrated that it's a better thing. To go further, even more, there is a question to tackle for the future. It's that the shock of economies that they will suffer in the future. It's a matter of a shock of a supply shock. That means a shrinking of production. This is what we had during the COVID pandemic. This is what we had also with the conflicts that broke out and that had an incidence on the price of raw materials. In this case, monetary policies are ill-equipped, and these are actions that are outside their control and their mandate. So, if it's true, then what could central banks do if not to serve the other economic policies, and especially the budget policy, which could raise problems of independence? Because if there's cooperation, we say often today that there should be cooperation, collaboration between monetary policies and budgetary policies, but in a case like this, well, politics prevail ultimately, and so the independence of central banks would be undermined accordingly. So, question mark, to what extent can monetary policies go, bearing in mind that they cannot on their own fight against these supply shocks as opposed to demand shocks? So we'll try to have an answer from the governors on this issue. Last point, which seems important to me, today we are in a situation where the dollar decided not to fulfill these obligations. They're trying even more to step away from these obligations. They should lose their exorbitant privilege of international currency status, of billing currency, of transaction currency, and reserve currency, as is the case today. We are in the right timing now to try to have other currencies, other international currencies, and we're thinking about the euro, but also the Chinese yuan. So the question is the following. What should be the policies of the central banks? What are the obligations that they should fulfill? Should these obligations be compatible with their other objectives and purposes? And I finish here with this introduction. Thank you, Professor Pollin, for setting the scene of this debate regarding the evolving role of central banks. With each crisis, there's a different role. The mandate is not the same from one country to another. And we'll talk about the common foundation, which is the independence of central banks, which justifies the powers vested in them. As the German economist Dangusch said, money is a too serious matter to leave it to political decision makers. It's a fundamental question for central banks. I will leave it to Mr. MAKHLOUF, because we're talking about levers and political drivers to non-elected representatives. What about the trust of citizens? It is key, isn't it? Hello, everyone. Thank you. And sorry, but I will speak in English.
Good morning, and thank you. And I apologize for speaking in English, but English is the language that us central bankers speak in, so it's my language. Bonjour, Denis. The question we're debating is not a technocratic question. I think that's the first thing that we should say. It's fundamentally a political question, because delegating a very significant economic power, the setting of interest rates, the maintenance of price stability, the maintenance of financial stability, is a very significant thing that democracies do. And I think we have to just keep thinking about what is it that democracies have decided to do, why have they decided to do it, and once that decision is made, how do you ensure that accountability for the decisions you take are maintained? And that is, to me, one of the fundamental platforms for ultimately the success of a central bank. And it relies hugely on trust. It relies hugely on the people of a country, in our case, the people of 20 countries and hopefully 27 countries, knowing and trusting that the central bank's actions are ultimately about delivering the mandate they've been given, which is price stability. In our case, in Europe, it's also about supporting the objectives of the European Union without prejudice to price stability. So that issue of trust is, for me, pretty fundamental. As I said, I think it's a political question. And I do think that if you're going to revise the mandates of a central bank, you have to think very carefully as to why you want to do that, as to how you're going to do that, and ultimately, how will the central bank account for exercising a new mandate so that it continues to maintain the trust of the public. From my perspective, if I can answer the question directly about what I think the ECB's mandate should be, I don't think it should be changed, because I think it's working. But I'm very happy to have a bigger discussion about that during the course of this morning. Thank you.
If I can ask you just on this question of trust, because we see a certain polarization in politics and central bankers being attacked publicly by politicians. We've seen Donald Trump against Jay Powell. So does that undermine the trust actively for central banks across the world, in your view?
You want me to start on that? Yeah, no, I do think, firstly, that central banks are helped if the system that has given them responsibility actually behaves in a way that supports that responsibility. So the political system has given central banks responsibility for price stability, and you would like to think that the people who operate in that sphere will then be supportive of the decisions that are made. So I think political attacks, doesn't matter who makes them, are unhelpful. But I do think that we have to recognize that the world has changed. You know, Francis Fukuyama said many years ago that political decay happens when people aren't prepared to change. And there is change clearly happening. But I think the responsibility on central banks, I think there is a responsibility on the political system, but the responsibility for central banks is to understand the change and to be proactive about managing it. And the single biggest thing that we can do that's different today from, say, 30 years ago is communicate and engage with the public. 30 years ago, arguably, we kept to ourselves, we made decisions, we occasionally talked to financial markets, but I think the world is now different, and we have to be prepared to talk to the public, to businesses, to households, using all the mediums that exist.
Governor STOURNARAS, you wanted to chip in on this question of trust and the question of the undermining of central bankers by politicians, given to the polarization of politics.
First of all, thank you very much for inviting me to this fantastic conference. I'm impressed by the introduction to this conference. I think it's a Bible of political economy, and I invite everybody to read the purposes of this conference. I will start with the ancient Greek philosopher Heraclitus, who said that everything changes and nothing stays. Central banks 50 years ago were different than what they are today. I just want to remind you that after the first oil price shock, Arthur Burns, then chairman of the Federal Reserve, instead of restricting monetary policy, he expanded monetary policy because he did not want Richard Nixon to jeopardize his election opportunities. And instead of monetary policy, he advocated price and wage controls. The result, a disaster. Great inflation, higher unemployment, stagflation. So we learned the first lesson that monetary policy should focus on price stability. Second lesson, independence of central banks to pursue price stability. I think this has been enshrined in statutes of almost all central banks today, and everybody accepts, from practice to academia, that central banks are performing a much better task today because they are independent. So we should keep it as a precious element. And I can say that the ECB is an example of an independent central bank that managed to deliver 2% inflation on average in all regimes, before the pandemic, after the pandemic, especially after the invasion of Ukraine by Russia and the oil price shock.
Hello. Thank you very much. And this is first time attending this great event. And thank you for organizers allowing me to attend this fantastic network events. And I'm representing the central bank. I'm not governor like my colleagues. I am sitting at the board of the central bank. Yes, 10 years ago, I was one of the governors, deputy governor of the central bank. I think the first the woman governor at the central bank. And today, I would like to ask the first question from the audience. How many of you been in Mongolia? How many of you visited Mongolia? Please raise the hand. 1, 2, oh, thank you. 3, great, 4. So I would, because many of you haven't visited Mongolia, let me say just a few seconds about Mongolia, where we are located. We are a landlocked country. My 2 neighbors, giant, powerful neighbors. One is China, other one is Russia. And landlocked country, small economy, open economy to everyone. And we are 3.5 million population, very young population. 70% of the population under age of 40. You could imagine. We do not have an aging problem like Europe, like China, like Japan. And we produce a lot of minerals, coking coal, iron ore, uranium, and recently we're working on rare earths to explore. And economy is growing. Last year, we grew the 4.9%. As a central bank, how old you can imagine? We are 100 years old. We celebrated 100 years anniversary of the central bank. And since the 1990, Mongolia is undergoing powerful economic transformation, moving towards to open market economy. Now we created the 2-tier banking system. One is the central bank, on the other hand, the commercial banks. According to the central bank law, the primary objective of the central bank is, can you imagine, price stability or stability of the national currency? What do you think?
I do. Well, probably the stability, price stability.
This is in hidden way. It is not said in the central bank law. Law says that we have to have the primary objective, stability of the national currency tugrik. And after this primary objective, we have a second objective, which is to contribute to balanced development of national economy, ensuring the financial stability of our financial markets, including the banking sector. Within these 2 scopes, we have the functions. We have to issue banknotes into the circulation, I mean the tugrik. Second, we are agent of the government. Thirdly, we manage the foreign exchange reserves of the country. We supervise and regulate the commercial banks. And we also manage the national payment system. The last but not least, the function is to support and to protect the legal rights of the bank's customers and depositors. You mentioned about trustworthiness of the central bank and also integrity. This is very important. For the central bank, governance is very important. We wanted to become, as institution, to become more digital, more greener, more pro-ESG, including the gender equality. And we are trying. Financial literacy is a high priority among our objectives. And at this moment, in Mongolia, we have 2 million accounts with the Facebook. Very digital. And social media is very important. And even we pursue the good monetary policy, if the normal people do not understand the wording of the inflation reporting and annual report of the central bank with the sophisticated language, it's not worse. So we are trying, we are asking as a supervisory board member, asking the central bank to produce inflation report, any other reports in a simple, easiest language that every single person in Mongolia could understand, and that is the role of the central bank, to educate the people in financial literacy. If the people become more like European, saving skills to learn, then country would become better off. That's my opinion in this section of discussion. Thank you.
Et donc là, on vient d'avoir un exemple.
So we had a crystal clear example of the different missions that central banks could have depending on the country. Here we talk about financial education of population. There was a linchpin moment where the debate resurfaced on the mission of central banks. It was in June 2021 when Christine Lagarde said in a speech that as the academy, as the pandemic is spanning, we should talk about something else than preserving. We should go towards greening and digital economy, and that launched a debate. Is that the role of central banks to be active in ecological transition? We know that the Fed said it was not its role to engage in that avenue. And now we have debates on the funding of defense. So I would like to have your viewpoint. To what extent can the mandate of central banks be broadened? Defense, greening, ecological transition?
Let's start by saying that the euro area is a complicated area. It has still an incomplete financial architecture. We have fragmented markets. We are net importers of energy, not net exporters of energy like the United States. We have not yet completed banking union, and we have not yet completed capital markets union. So we have a long way to go. But that means there is a lot of upside. The central bank, the European Central Bank, and the Euro system cannot tackle all these problems. These are mostly for governments to do. But we can contribute to tackling all these problems, first of all, by providing a framework of stability, of trust, of confidence. This keeps interest rate low. We have managed to bring interest rates from 4% last year to 2% today. For instance, that helps investment. It helps investment in green transition. Of course, we contribute to digitalization. We want to create a digital euro. This is one of our tasks, and I hope the political system will also follow. So, we keep our mandate of price stability. This is the foundation, but we urge the political system to complete the banking union. We have now two benchmark reports. We have the Letta report about the integration of our markets, and we have the Draghi report about how to increase investment so that we close the gap with the United States, not only the investment gap, but also the productivity gap. So we have a plan today which we should follow. As far as the green economy is concerned, as you know, the European Central Bank in its monetary policy strategy has incorporated climatic change in its targets. We know that inflation is affected by climatic change. If you remember, with the heat in Southern Europe 2 years ago, inflation has been affected. So both inflation and output are being affected by climatic change. So we should not ignore this phenomena. We should take them into account in our targets, in our strategy, mostly, in our collateral strategy, and also as supervisors, we also stress testing banks for the effects of the green transition. So all in all, we need to make the Eurozone a complete financial market, a complete banking market, but price stability, in my view, should remain the main objective of the central bank. So, yes, mandates change. As I said in the beginning, 50 years ago we have been different, but I think price stability, which is enshrined in the treaty, and is enshrined for good purposes, because if we deviate sustainably from low inflation, not 0, 2%, this is going to have adverse effect on growth, on employment, on investment.
Donc sur l'idée de...
So on the idea of central banks participating to defense expenditure, so we cannot prosper in an environment where it is fragile in Europe. For the participation of EU to defense and military preparation should be a priority. Do you think that the role of central banks should take that into account?
I don't think that central banks can intervene in the dialogue regarding defense. We recognize the need to defend ourselves better, especially after the change in the United States policy, which is changing the post-war regime. But this is not the job of the central bank to say how this will be done. The central bank, so the ECB and the Euro system, as I said, recognizes the need to increase investment. And for that, we need to implement the two blueprints we have, I said before, the Letta report and the Draghi report. And to say in few words, we have asked banks, we have asked asset managers, why, despite the fact that Eurozone has a surplus of savings over investment, this is why we have a 3.5% of GDP current account surplus. This is because we save 3.5% of GDP more than we invest, and asset managers used to take these savings either in the form of deposit or in other instruments and invest them abroad, mostly in the United States. And the answer is because the rate of return of investment in Europe is not satisfactory, and second, because we don't have a liquid bond market. So we need to increase the rate of return of investment. How? By integrating our markets. The IMF has shown that the internal barriers to the European market are equivalent to tariffs of the order of 75% of GDP. Sorry, 75% effective tariff, 45% on goods, 100% on services. This is exactly the way how to proceed. Second, how to increase the liquidity so that we can invest our surpluses, our saving surpluses in Europe by providing more safe assets. We need safe assets. For instance, during the pandemic, we engineered the NGEU, the RRF, the Recover and Resilience Fund that the European Commission borrowed 800 billion euros. This is a way to proceed with safe assets. Now, if we proceed to a public good, which if European politicians consider to be defense, let's continue along the model that we had with the NGEU, the RRF. But we need a safe asset in order to increase the liquidity of the domestic bond market.
Et sur la question des outils et des leviers que la Banque centrale a.
What about the liquidity of the European market? Mr. Pollin said that it's a matter of supply shock, and the conventional monetary policies cannot respond to supply shocks. It's a matter of industrial policy. So since we'll have more shocks of this type, should we change the tools? And what could be the tools of the European Central Bank? Maybe Governor MAKHLOUF, you can answer to that. First, I would like to answer to the question of defense.
Because I agree with what Yannis just said, that it's not our role to get involved in in the increase in defense spending that's now starting. But I want to just explain how I think about the difference, because you made this contrast between green and defense. As Yannis said, for me, climate change is changing our economies. And the central banks need to understand how our economies are changing and how, what the impact of that will be ultimately on price stability, so that we can be forward-leaning and manage that. Defense is a choice made by the fiscal authority, by the government ultimately, as to where they want to put their money. You can choose to put it in defense. You can choose to build air conditioning for public conference centers. You can choose to put your money somewhere. It won't affect the way the economy works. So for me, there's absolutely nothing inconsistent with our mandate for the central bank to be interested in and concerned with what you would describe as green issues. Defense is a completely different thing, and I don't think the ECB has a role to play in that at all. Sorry, I've now forgotten your second question.
Sur les chocs d'offres et les...
On the supply shocks and the new levers that the bank could use for this.
Central banks need to, we've got actually a very powerful set of tools which we have been given. We obviously need to use them carefully, but in my view, we do have the toolkit to meet almost any shock. And if you think about what's happened in the last just 5 years, where an unimaginable lockdown in economies because of the pandemic, the war in Europe and its impact on energy, the turbulence that we had, we have to go back a bit further now. We've actually, in our financial markets, but just the last 5 years, we've seen, apart from a small blip in with recent inflation, we've actually seen price stability, we've actually seen financial stability, and we've used our tools to deliver that. The strategy review we've just done, I think, has helped us to understand how to use our tools perhaps better over the next 5 years or in the future. So we keep learning, but we've got a toolkit. I don't think we need new tools.
Je voudrais aborder la question du dollar, si je vais venir à vous, Madame DANZANBALJIR.
I would like to talk about the question of dollars. We're talking currently about the restructuring of the international monetary system and the question of the dollar as a global currency reserve. So I wanted to ask you, Mrs. DANZANBALJIR, your point of view on that. Is the euro, is it a moment of opportunity for the euro or the yuan to gain a little bit more influence? And what does this involve for the monetary policies? First of all, for monetary policies, Madam.
Asking, and I would like to give just a few seconds about the previous two questions regarding defense versus green. And my opinion is that let's imagine that this is night, that we have a dark night, lots of stars, and there is the moon. The moon is the central bankers. We are the policy makers. We can say we won't harm, government or the government policies, We could tell them that it's better to go greener financing instead of war. We should say that peacemaking in the global level would make better off for everyone. Because if every person is happy, the central bank policies would be implemented easily. Our job would be easier. And the second, you talked about the conventional versus unconventional tools. Yes, we used, during the COVID time, unconventional unconventional tools, subsidized loans. But this is cost for the central bank, making many central banks with the negative net worth. This is again trustworthy of the central bank among the normal people. So it shouldn't be continuously used like everyday breakfast. We should stop. We should be more innovative. We should create more efficient, better tools rather than going unconventional policies. Let's go to your question regarding dollar. In the Mongolian case, the central bank, we do manage the foreign exchange reserves of the country. And as I told you, that we have other two neighbors, and we do produce and sell all of the minerals, mostly the 90% of the exports to China. And because the China previously much more interested in US dollar, but now the renminbi, Chinese renminbi, become the international currency. We believe that diversification to manage the foreign exchange is very important, and not only dollar, the euro and other currencies, including the gold, and must be in the basket, must be in the portfolio. And as you mentioned about investing in domestic bond, euro bond markets, we do invest in European AAA euro bonds, and emerging markets is very important, globalization very important, and I would ask the institutional investor look at Mongolia to invest, because the Mongolia is the emerging economy with the growth rate is last year 4.9%. Even though during the crisis time, we never set limitation on capital, always the free capital flow out, and there is no control over the foreign exchange. We do have a floating exchange rates, and we do create very nice friendly environment for investors, up to 27 years stable tax regime for the investors. And thank you.
Gouverneur MAKHLOUF, sur cette question de la politique.
On this question of the position of euro as a global reserve currency, is this desirable? And if it gains importance, what does this imply in terms of the mandate of the European Investment Bank?
Standing and the euro's role, I think a lot of this depends on your time horizon. So in my view, if you have a very long time horizon, I think we will see the dominance of the dollar fall and the euro and other currencies increase in the global economic system. But I use those words, the long term, very deliberately, because I can't, for the moment, for a number of reasons, see this happening quickly. So, as Yannis was saying earlier, I mean, frankly, Europe's economic system is still not formed, and we've got a single monetary policy, and we've got a single currency. But there are too many other parts of the system that still need to form to actually create, ultimately, I think, essential fiscal capacity with a single safe asset to start, in some ways, you could say, to mirror the dollar. And I think it's when you get to that stage that you will see a greater use of the euro in financial markets, in businesses, trade and pricing, and etc. I think what we're seeing right now with the dollar is a realignment on the part, a readjustment on the part of investors who are seeing, it's not so much tariffs, which get a lot of headline, are seeing that they're seeing the rule of law in the United States actually weaken. And they are responding accordingly, because that means there's greater risk to their investments and their assets, and they're adjusting. But I think it's a bit far to say that that's going to lead to the euro suddenly replacing it, because as I said, I don't think the euro is ready to do that. Of course, I do think, and this is the second thing that's happening, I do think that opportunities that we're seeing right now in the global economic scene, there are opportunities that we at the ECB, but also political leaders across Europe should be taking. Because these opportunities to actually increase the standing of the European Union, to strengthen its sovereignty and its autonomy, I think these things matter and they need to be taken. I did quite deliberately talk about the very long term and other currencies, because ultimately the very long term, I would expect an economy like China's, once its capital controls are removed, to start playing a much more active role in the global economic system than it is now. It seems an inevitable, if you stand back and you look at the trajectory of the global economy, I mean, the center of the global economy has been moving east now for probably the last 30 years. And it's hard to see that trajectory suddenly change, but it'll take some time for the dollar to lose its current status.
Gouverneur STOURNARAS, vous vouliez dire quelque chose là-dessus?
Would you like to say something on this?
I'd like to say that I fully concur with our colleague from Mongolia that we should first try to talk to each other and then fight. So peace, in my view, is a much better project than war. But I fully also concur with what Gabriel said about the role of the dollar and the euro. But I want to complement by saying that what changed actually is the imposition of tariffs. Of course, this is not the only reason that the dollar is weakening. It's the rule of law that Gabriel espoused, but also the fiscal situation and the sustainability of public debt in the United States. But let me start with tariffs. I think one of the strongest laws in economics, which has been preserved over the last 100 years after David Ricardo's speeches, famous speeches in the British Parliament, is that the law of comparative advantage. Unfortunately, it seems that some politicians do not understand the law of comparative advantage. That law and the ensuing liberalization of trade in the last 100 years has increased the welfare of the planet. So now, and I can also say one example why this is not correct, what is happening today. In the past, it was the weaker that wanted to impose tariffs. For instance, when Bismarck wanted to follow the example of the British manufacturing, he imposed tariffs. And he used the expression, this is to protect the infant industry. So now, to have the strongest and the most innovative economy of the planet imposing tariffs, sorry to say, it is absurd. Who is going to be heard first? I think America. So those who impose tariffs will be heard first, and the evolution of markets and the dollar, I think, is witnessing this result. So if you combine tariffs with the attacks on the Fed and on institutions, with the questions on the fiscal sustainability of the United States following the beautiful tax bill, it explains the evolution of the dollar exchange rate in the recent weeks. I fully agree with Gabriel. The status of the dollar is not going to change from one day to another. The euro is in a position to gain share in international reserves, but using the, again, sorry to say that again, the ancient Greek saying that you don't only, it is not sufficient to have Goddess Athena help you. You have to move your hands as well. So we need to do things in Europe. We need to complete the banking union, to complete the capital markets union, to have a safe asset, to eliminate the internal barriers. So in this way, the euro can increase its share and its role in the international financial market. So China, yes, but as far as China has progressed a lot, very impressively, but as far as it continues to have capital controls and lack of liberalization of its banking and financial system, it's difficult to understand how the yuan can gain at the expense of the dollar. So the euro now is in a very good position to gain, provided, of course, that we do what Gabriel and myself have said in the beginning.
Madame, vous vouliez dire un mot juste avant qu'on prenne des questions du public?
Did you want to say something?
Whether we are going to invest in euro, and in order to make euro like American foreign exchange reserve currency, I would like to note that People's Bank of China, 10 years ago, RMB was not that known to international financial market. What China did, People's Bank of China, making the swap arrangement with the central banks around Asia. And in order to make a euro like following the People's Bank of China's experience, that ECB must create kind of tools, kind of swap arrangements for central banks like in Asia. Then it would be easy to invest more, of course, in Europe. But in order to invest Europe, we have to see the structure, investment, and budget where they are spending. So if too much in defense and destruction, all of everything would make not much interested in euro to invest. And this is my comment.
Merci beaucoup. On va prendre des questions du public.
Thank you very much. We're going to take some questions from the audience. Thank you. Thank you for these fascinating presentations. Cosmo Jakiashulova, I'm first student representative within the board of SCP and co-creator of the equity startup and member of the youth project. My question will be in English because it addresses the governor of the Bank of Greece.
Sat at the very seat you're sat in and said that he wanted the EU to launch a fully integrated savings and investment union with harmonized rules, a single legal regime option, and a unified approach to financial supervision and market access. He said he wanted that to be launched on the 1st of July 2027, which, as you'll know, is quite symbolic because it marks the start of the Greek presidency of the Council of Europe. I wanted to know what your reaction to that is and whether you support it. If you support it, what you think Greece's role would be in making it a reality. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that. As you know, Greece has passed over a very difficult period, but it proved to be a success story. It overcame all the difficulties and disproved all those who were saying that we should leave the euro, including many famous academics, I'm sorry to say, because they misunderstood and they thought that leaving a currency is equivalent to a devaluation. It was a great mistake. Leaving a currency hasn't happened before in history in any country, and it implies much, much worse things. But yes, I think 2 years is enough time to complete the banking union. The banking union, as you know, in the last few days, there was an agreement for CMDU, for crisis management deposit insurance. So there is an agreement, and I think the procedures in the following weeks will confirm this progress. So capital markets union, yes, savings and investment union. Savings is a euphemism because, as I said, we have enough savings in Europe. we need investment. So we need to turn savings into domestic investment. I described 2 conditions for this to happen. So 2 years is enough for this to happen. And I will be very happy if this coincides with the Greek presidency, with a proud Greece that made sure that it overcame its difficult problems of the past. It had the biggest adjustment, fiscal adjustment, of every OECD country in history, more than 17% of GDP, even more. It did a lot of reforms, stabilized the banking system, and of course, its peers, especially from the Eurogroup, they compensated Greece, giving it the biggest financial assistance ever given to any country in history. More than 150% of GDP in new loans, cheap loans with a long maturity. So it was a win-win situation. Greece is repaying back its debt. Also, it has brought back the payment of its debt. So that was an example of European cohesion and fraternity, I think. So I would be extremely proud and happy if if savings union and investment union confirmed on the 1st of July 2027.
Merci beaucoup. Il nous reste 3 minutes.
Thank you very much. We have 3 minutes. We have 1.5 questions, so 1 question, and then we will go to the conclusions with Jean-Paul Paulin. Thank you. Philippe Franchet, I'm the manager of Private Equity Fund. I have a question on dependency and the fact that central banks are not elected because the monetary policy is a subject that is too important to be reserved to politics. Do you think that the budget is too important a subject to be handed over to politicians, and are certain elements of the budgetary policy, should these be dealt with by independent organizations and not elected representatives? We talked about green and defense, but would you see this extended to other areas? And I would also like to question you on cryptocurrencies, to know whether this is not a form of the people grabbing back its independence, because certain central banks increase the monetary mass in a rather exaggerated manner. 2.5 minutes to answer all of that.
It would take me too long to answer crypto, but I think there is a big difference between monetary policy and budgetary policy. Monetary policy is essentially focused on price stability. It's a technical tool, ultimately. Budgetary policy is ultimately about choice. It's about the political system choosing what it will prioritize. And I think that is absolutely for the politicians to be deciding. I don't think you can delegate budgetary policy to an independent institution. I mean, you can have things, you can have institutions to make sure you're keeping to budgetary rules, but I don't think the decisions themselves are of the same nature as monetary policy. So it's ultimately for the politicians to make those choices.
Professeur Paulin, désolé, on a squeezé un peu votre...
Professor Paulin, sorry, I'm afraid we've run over the time into your conclusion. Yes, well, the conclusions. What I take home from this debate is, first of all, that the club of central banks is still united around independence. That is so important to it. And moreover, I entirely share this point of view as a theoretician. We've seen, and it's also true in Mongolia and as in other countries, I would say that here I hear a certain optimism with regard to the possibility of central banks of going beyond their traditional objectives. On this point, there would be a lot of discussion to have. But, and finally, this idea of deglobalization of the dollar captures my interest. That has been announced for a long time, and it has been wanted for a long time, in particular by the BRICS. And this could indeed become true quite quickly. But for this to happen, on the side of China, we need a liberalization of capital movements, and on the side of Europe, we just need a union of savings and investment, which is robust. And for this, there is a lot to be done, in particular on the side of budgetary policy. And there must also be a banking union, of which we have the premises, but which remains to be built. Thank you very much, Professor Pollin, and thank you to our participants.